Thank you. I have the advantage of being the only person here who's not a reporter in some way. So unlike Dean, I won't have to see you again. I don't have to worry about what I say so much. In fact, you can even look at just how we're dressed up here and tell that one of us is not like the others, right? But I hope that I can bring a little different perspective as an academic. And in fact, Ted started by saying that we like to make things complicated. And academics love to paraphrase Einstein because we all like to pretend that we're smart. And he said everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think that's one of the big issues with covering finance today. It has gotten just more and more complicated. You can see it when you look at what people do in the field. There no longer are just investment bankers who do everything. Everybody's a specialist today, and the things that they're doing are just becoming harder and harder for non-specialists to understand. In fact, when you look at securitization, during the same period that you're talking about news coverage, I was dealing with the banks and with a lot of students and people who were doing this stuff. And around about 2006, I did some work on securitization. No one person in the banks could walk me all the way through how a securitization works. There were people who specialized in selling them. They would go talk to other people about what sort of product they might need. There were people who specialized in finding all the mortgages for them. There were people who specialized in putting them together. There were people who specialized in talking to the rating agencies about what they should be rated. And many of these people knew the person directly next to them in the chain, but they couldn't even tell me the names of all the people in the chain. Things have just gotten that complicated. So it's asking an awful lot for people to be able to break that down and understand it. It's asking a lot of you guys as you sit outside to do that. If the bankers themselves, Jane said we haven't had this panel yet. One of the problems of going near the end is that people have already stole all my good stuff, right? Because I was going to say, I could have been asked to sit on a panel of analysts doing this. I could have, because they all missed this, right? I could have been asked to sit on a panel of bankers doing this. I think we have seen that panel, though. I think Congress has already forced us to do that. So we can see that all these players, they missed something. Now, all of them were worried, just like you guys were. The problem is, how do you put it all together? And when do you say it's all going to go down? When I moved to Boston, another real estate story, my wife and I didn't buy a house because we went out there in 1998, moving from the Midwest, and said, these house prices have to be too high. 2 years later, we gave in and bought a house, and we paid about 30% more for the same beat-up little house that we would have bought 2 years before. Right? You can even know that these things don't seem rational, but we still have to do something in between when that's happening and when it all falls apart. So the first challenge for you guys is understanding how tough this stuff is. And where I differ with Jane, and I'm going to go a little bit with Bart here, is if you're going to be a business journalist, you have to do it, right? And so your job is getting harder and harder. I don't know if this means you guys should specialize. We're already seeing that somewhat with journalists. Maybe Jane should focus on her part, and other people should focus on their part. And then maybe what we need is better communication across journalists as well. I know you're all out there hunting for your own stories because just like I get promoted based on my own publications, you do too. But somehow we have to acknowledge that the world's gotten more complicated, that individuals may no longer be able to understand it on their own and deal with that. And I do think that maybe this is where Bart's criticisms come together. And I like Rush's piece a lot too, but I know I talked to him when he was writing it, and one of the things I said is, yeah, there were lots of articles questioning this, but there were lots of articles that seemed to support it too. And there were so many different pieces. Maybe if we put all those together, we could have created a better story. And maybe that's what Bart's trying to do when he's trying to look as a set. There were lots of great individual pieces, but when it all comes together. And that leads us to the second challenge that you guys face. And just like you, I face this. How do we make these complicated things simple enough for people who don't spend their lives in this to understand? Okay, and that's the real communication challenge. You can beat the drums and be concerned about this all you want. I can tell you that a lot of the business faculty were concerned about it. But Larry mentioned the stuff that had been done on executive pay. I think there were great articles challenging executive pay well before anybody else wanted to hear the concern. I think most of us didn't want to hear concern about executive pay because as long as executives were getting paid that much, I could go to my dean, and you'll appreciate this, Ted, and say, well, I shouldn't be paid as much as the CEO, but when the CEO is making that much, I should be making more than what I'm making, right? So we all had a reason to want to believe in this. We all had a reason to want to believe the market was going to go. Somehow, you guys have to influence this. There's a great academic piece in the Journal of Financial Economics that shows that, well, there were lots of articles written by journalists, and that the journalists really did seem to understand what excess pay was and the complexity of stock option pay, et cetera. The companies that were covered really didn't change what they were doing. So the outcome of the paper is, yeah, journalists seem to have gotten it, but gee, journalists didn't serve the role that we think they should serve of watchdogs because nobody changed. Well, why didn't anybody change? Because the regulators didn't care, individuals weren't yelling yet, et cetera.
But what should we have done differently if you said we wrote all those things and regulators didn't change? Let's kind of, if we focus on that, I don't get it. There's a disconnect.
No,
I can't imagine there's a topic that we could have hit harder than that topic.
I agree that this is a real challenge. And again, this comes back to the world is complex, and when readers are reading this and they don't understand stock options, they're trying to understand the subtleties of what you're writing. You know, the job of the press, when the press is the most effective, is when it gets the masses concerned about something so they can put political pressure on it. You don't have an easy job. I mean, I couldn't do it.
You can give us legislative power.
Then you'd react just like the legislators. Anyway, to me, those are the two big concerns that as we think about, did we do it right or not, these are the balances that you guys face, and it makes your job really tough. But if you want to stay relevant, you're going to have to figure out how to balance those two things. How do you understand the complexity? And then how do you make it work for people who don't get to spend the time that you do on it?
I think the focus on executive pay is a very good paradigm, because even back when Larry was at the Journal, you know, every year we did a review of CEO pay. Every year. It was a separate pull-out section. The advertising department tried to kill it because they couldn't sell any ads in it. In those days, things were sufficiently prosperous that I could insist on running it anyway and get my way. And year after year after year, the theme of that section was that the ratio of CEO pay to ordinary worker pay had gone up another several orders of magnitude. And the one time that the Congress tried to do something about it, remember the famous $1 million cap? You couldn't get a tax deduction for anything more than $1 million. It took about 90 seconds for the wise guys in the HR department to figure out, well, we'll just use options and it'll be performance linked, because that was the loophole. And I would submit that there was a failure here. In this case, it was not a failure of journalism. I mean, the journalism pounded away on it. It was a failure of corporate boards. Compensation committees could have done something about that very easily, and they didn't. Why? Because they were all on each other's compensation committee, and
which we wrote about.
Which we wrote about. So I don't mean to say that we were perfect or even very good, but on that subject, that was one that I can't imagine journalism doing much more than it did. Alan?